that was the brain. Let's jump to a couple of the red flags that came out.
Yeah, that was the good part, people. Now we're getting into the bad stuff. Here's my flaws.
The area that stuck out, and this is, I mean, it's we're gonna get into what's going on, but the interesting thing about this is a perfect example of the difference between genetics and functional genomics. You know, how do you actually make this actionable? Because in genetics, all I would be telling you now is you can expect an 80% likelihood of having some kind of cardiovascular incident.
Yep.
That's genetics. So what do you do with that other than walk away with anxiety, right? Because I haven't told you what to do about it, but that's genetics. Is that based on your profile, and actually based on your profile, there's an 80% chance that you're going to have severe cardiovascular issues.
Right.
That's what the numbers say.
And that goes right in line with the fact that my grandmother died at age 66, very, very young, from, I want to say, her 4th heart attack.
Oh, yeah. And it makes perfect sense when I look at your genetics.
Yep.
Now, functional genomics is why? What's going on that's going to cause, you're not born with heart disease. It's right. Not, this is the difference between a genetic condition, sickle cell syndrome. You're born with it. You have it. There's a gene that's mutated, variant version that causes sickle cell, and you have it. You're not born with diabetes, cardiovascular disease, stroke, dementia. These happen 50 plus, and then all of a sudden they progress, and then treatment, or for some people, a really bad outcome, right? So what happened in those 50 years that led to that disease all of a sudden expressing? It was those choices that were mismatched to your genetic legacy. And what are those choices? Environment, the loads you're exposing yourself to, nutrition, and lifestyle. Lifestyle is like exercise, sleep, all the things that you do. And nutrition and environment are obviously the things that you expose yourself to. So now in your case, what we see, there's 2 big red flags. The heart disease typically doesn't happen in the heart. It usually happens in the arteries around the heart, blockage, calcification, and all of a sudden blood doesn't flow, and then the heart doesn't get enough blood and there's a heart attack.
Right.
So why does that happen here in the arteries? Because some people, like yourself, have bad hardware, right? So you have, of the arterial structure, the inner lining is called the endothelium. And this is one of the things we talked about that day.
Yes. I love this talk.
Yeah. I was sorry to sort of, voodoo this and make the talk.
I know, it was me. Who knew? You're talking about me.
Yeah. But this is the case. But the good news is you're at the age where now that you know this, you can 100% avoid it. Now that you know what to focus on, right?
Right.
So that inner lining, you have a very bad quality version of this. Paper thin, prone to damage. But what does that mean? Why would it get damaged, right?
Right.
So now the other thing we see, another big glaring red flag is, and I almost giggled as I opened this up, which was kind of evil, but because it's so clearly the example we were talking about, and it happened to be you, right? You are literally missing the detox genes. Forget about what version, you don't even have them.
I know. Can you believe that? Like 2 out of the 3, I don't even have them.
You don't have, and these are the main genes that instruct the glutathionization. So glutathionization is take toxins that are in the blood, bind glutathione, send it to the liver to metabolize and get rid of it. Everybody does this. You don't, right? At the gut, the first line of defense of the gut, horrible. In fact, I'm just going to poke and look at one thing. And now, what does that mean? It means that you are chock full of these toxins that are causing that damage to that poor quality endothelial lining. That cellular structure was not designed to deal with that level of sort of toxic insult, right? And now you have the bad quality version of it. So at the lungs, you're actually doing quite well. So your ability to deal with, airborne toxins, chemicals, mold, perfumes, whatever would give somebody like a minor headache or whatever, you don't do that. You do that quite well. Your first line of defense here is good. Mm-hmm. Once it gets in, you don't handle it well. You don't have any soldiers in the bloodstream getting rid of the stuff. It's just free flowing. Your gut lining, zero capacity. So there's no frontline soldiers there defending you. Whatever you eat that has pesticides, drying agents, any sorts of mold or chemicals gets right into your blood, and it's probably going to cause inflammatory issues to your gut, which you may have noticed with certain foods. I can't understand, why it's so bothered,
Absolutely.
you
This
know.
is so crazy because, I actually did a podcast a couple of weeks ago, just me talking about, why I started my podcast in the first place. And, it had to do with my mother-in-law having colon cancer. But one of the things that I went over was that right after she died from that, I took a good look at myself and I was like, something is wrong with me. And I don't know what it is. And I just happened to watch a podcast with Dr. Gundry, and that's how I found Dave Asprey. And, I was like, and I say at the time, I literally had diarrhea for like 6 months and I did not know why. Like I
Yeah.
couldn't figure it out. Like I've just had gut issues for forever. And until I made some massive dietary changes, it did a 180
Yeah.
just from food.
And this is why. So your gut, literally, the detox capacity is zero. It's non-existent. So we're not even talking about what version of the gene do you have, how well do you don't do it. You literally don't have the genetic instruction. So something as simple as bread. Well, guess what? Whereabouts do you live?
I live in Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh. So you have a winter, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. So any of the areas where there's a strong winter, there's usually storage of wheat and grain so that there's enough bread, through the winter. And in order to, for the farming to catch up, and you know this, like you're on a farm, they use drying agents and chemicals to dry the wheat faster so they can get more yield.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff is super toxic, right? That stuff in Europe, it's illegal, by the way. They're not even allowed to use it.
Wow.
So one particular chemical, which is used quite a bit in North America. So that stuff, your gut doesn't have the ability to clear. So not only is it going to cause an inflammatory insult at the gut, which could lead to IBS, Crohn's, irritable bowel syndrome, 6 months of diarrhea,
Yes.
right? Because what happens? Okay, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10, 20, 25 years of that constant exposure that you're not matched to, eventually you cross the threshold where your body gives up. And then it's 6 months of diarrhea, right?
Yep.
And then you have to heal it, not with a pill, because you're still causing that inflammatory insult. It's by removing the load that your body can't handle. So at the time, you didn't know what was going on, but you intuitively did kind of the right stuff. So now we know your detox profile sucks.
Yes.
So there's stuff for sure in the blood causing this inflammatory insult to this poor endothelial that you have, right? So
Right.
what then does the body do? The body recognizes this inflammation here, and it says, that's no good. We're going to send cholesterol as a hormone to reduce that inflammation, which is what your body will start doing. When cholesterol meets toxicity, it hardens and gets deposited, which is what's going to happen if you don't clear that toxicity from your blood. And then you get that buildup of that cholesterolemia, which again, it takes decades and decades and decades. By the time you're 50, your doctor says, well, your cholesterol levels are elevated, and it seems like you might even have a blockage. You need to get on a statin, a Lipitor or some other kind of statin. And we're now masking the symptom, which took you 30, 35, 40 years of wrong choices to get to. All you really need is to support those genetic gaps and holes. But now in your case, guess what? There's another layer. In your case, not only is all this happening, your lipid transport, your ability to move cholesterol around, is the worst possible. We very rarely see this, by the way. So in the report, it will tell you high risk of Alzheimer's, dementia, and stroke. Right?
Yep. Good old APOE4.
Yeah, APOE4 is, and it's a well-studied gene. It's typically in genetic tests, but again, the genetic test will tell you elevated risk of Alzheimer's. And then the belief is, I just have to wait and see if I get it. And that's where things kind of fall apart, where I can't tell you how many people have been referred to us by friends or whatever and say, you know what, I don't want to take a DNA test because I don't want to know if I'm getting Alzheimer's. Because they actually don't have any idea how, and this is not their fault. Our medical system does a really good job of acute care, solving emergencies.
Completely agree.
Yeah, and that same
top of the line.
Amazing. But that same modality toolkit is applied to chronic disease, where you believe it's the same thing, where wait for the problem and then mask it. So when a typical genetic test tells someone you got an 80% chance of Alzheimer's, which is what somebody would tell you with your genetic test, it's now like, okay, well, that's most likely, I better start planning, because that it's most likely coming. Well, why does the Alzheimer's happen? What does that gene do? What that gene does is lipid transport. So what is happening is there's certain things that can cross the blood-brain barrier. Very few, but certain things, including mutated proteins, frayed amino acids, right? Muscle fiber, that type of thing.
Right.
Which can then, and when they cross the blood-brain barrier, start to interact with healthy tissue, and you all of a sudden get to this sort of state where your brain has been loaded with the wrong stuff, in simple terms,
right,
and leads to broken neural linkages, etc. So fasting is one simple fix. If you don't have the ammunition in your body, these mutated proteins, frayed amino acids, there's nothing to cause the broken neural linkages, especially with your good BDNF, right? So if you were to fast 2-3 days a week, that would eliminate the ammunition, right? If you were to do other things to reduce your toxic load, there's less need for your body to use cholesterol as an anti-inflammatory hormone. So you reduce that ammunition, which is the trigger that leads to the problem. So as opposed to waiting to see, you can now intervene and just prevent it. So this is where we go from, like I said, genetics to, hey, 80%, good luck, to why is it actually, what's the biochemistry? What does that gene actually do? And then now that we know what it does, we can now start to recommend, take this supplement, eat like this, exercise like this. For example, I would tell you, don't do cardiovascular exercise.
That was in the report, and I was a runner. I did triathlons and all that kind of stuff, and I read that and I was like, wow. And so what's funny is I've actually just been kind of doing more heavy lifting stuff at the farm and just trying to get in my workout from a strength perspective, and I'm actually doing better. Cutting out the cardio.
Yeah, even just so, first of all, the cardio would add to that inflammatory load, which you don't cope with. Some people, we tell them, yeah, go do it. It's good for you. For you, it's not. And if I even just look at you, I mean, we're going to look at your hormones, but I would predict that you're more androgenized, meaning that there's more testosterone, right? Which also speaks to lifting heavy things, pushing heavy things, and you'll most likely feel better. So that speaks to longevity. Testosterone is what gives you that.
Well, let's talk about that, because my profile said I'm balanced, like between the two.
Okay, let's take a look.